All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next webinar. This week, we tackle your ultimate guide to moving to the Chicago suburbs. My name is Mike McElroy. I'm the founder of Central Coast Realty. With me today, again, is Brendan O'Donnell, one of our senior realtors here over at Center Coast, who has helped many a Chicagoan make the move from the city to the suburbs, or just buy their first place in a Chicago suburb, as opposed to buying a place in the city and then moving on out there. Brendan is also from Naperville, so he knows that part of the world well, like the back of his hand, which is good because I'm gonna punt a lot of this webinar to him today. So thanks for being here, Brendan.
Pleasure to be here, Alex.
All right. A little bit about Center Coast Realty, in case this is your first webinar with us. We are a residential real estate brokerage. That means we help Chicagoans buy and sell homes, but we are a little bit different than some others. When you work with most of the bigger brokerages, you're actually working with an independent contractor who kind of just flies the flag of that larger brokerage. And they're 100% commission. That means if you don't buy a home, they don't make any money. At Center Coast, we're a little different. Our entire agency works together as an integrated team. And here's the really important thing. All of our agents and staff are full-time. All they do is real estate all day, every day, and they're on salary. So they don't have this incentive to pressure you into buying something. Our agents do get a bonus. Actually, our whole team gets a bonus, but it's based on how happy our clients are with their services. So there's still that incentive, but it's geared towards the client satisfaction. So that's the difference between Center Coast Realty. If you haven't worked with us before, I want to talk a little bit about why we do webinars like this. And if you follow us, you see that we put these on every couple of weeks. We've worked with close to 1,200 people at this point over the last 10 years. And we've noticed the same questions often come up again and again. And at Center Coast, a big part of our mission is educating people about real estate. So what we've done is we've just taken a bunch of those questions and we've put our answers in this handy dandy slide deck so that we can have you be as prepared and informed as possible once you start your real estate transaction process with us. And we find that that makes people happier clients, more successful home buyers and sellers. So we like to start like that. There's also a ton of information out there on the internet from family and friends, and it can be a little overwhelming. We realize that because it's kind of hard to know what applies to you and your situation. So this webinar is designed to tell you everything that you need to know about moving from Chicago to a suburban home. And it's also going to spark some questions about your specific situation. So we've got the chat box in there, the Q&A box. Don't use the chat, or Jessica will get mad at me for saying chat. You want to use the Q&A button if you have any questions. We'll do our best to answer as many of those as we can. That's so we want to be respectful of your time. So you're bound to come up with some questions throughout the webinar about your specific situation. And a lot of times the best thing we can do is, rather than just trying to answer a one sentence question, is have a little bit more of a dialogue with you about what your plans are and what you're trying to accomplish. So here's what you can do. At the end of this, we're going to put a link on the last slide, and it's actually a link right to Brendan's calendar. And you can just grab 15 minutes on his calendar. It's no pressure, even if you're not looking to buy or sell anytime soon. We're happy to chat with you and just be a sounding board, give you some advice and a little bit of feedback on your plans, answer any questions that you might have. That way, you can be a little bit more prepared when the time does come. So we'll put that link up in the chat towards the end today. So here's our flow for today. Like I said, these are the most common questions that we get. So that's how we're going to structure our presentation. A lot of people who are buying their first single family home outside of the city have kind of a hard time picking where they want to be. There's so many options, right? So how do you narrow it down? We're going to talk about that. Also, a huge consideration right now is what the market is like right now, both in the city in Chicago, if you have a place to sell, as well as in the community that you're looking to buy in. So understanding the dynamics of those respective markets is super important to planning. That's maybe the most important part of this whole thing. So definitely pay attention to that part. And right up there with that conversation is the age-old question, should you sell first or should you buy first? So in other words, if you own a home currently in the city or anywhere else, and you want to own a different one, and not both of them at the same time, Which should you do first? Should you go find that first place and then go sell your old place? Or should you sell your old place first and then go find a new place? It's a little tricky balancing act. We're going to talk you through it. And if you've bought a home in the city before, you may kind of know the ropes, but there are a few things you need to know about buying a single family home and buying in different communities. So we're going to cover those as well. So that's our plan for today. What I'd like to do now is get a little feel for the room. So a couple of questions for you that we're going to put up here. First off, do you own a home currently? There's going to be a poll up there. So let us know, and then I can tailor the rest of this presentation to where people are at. Not yet. All righty. Next question I have is, where are you at in the process? Just kind of getting started? Are you already under contract? Somewhere in between? Let us know where you're at, and I'll make sure that we kind of gear the rest of the presentation towards you there. Okay. And what do you want to learn about in this presentation today? So we have a few different things that are common that a lot of people mention, but anything in particular you want us to call out? I'm going to give you a few categories here, but if there's anything else that you're not seeing up here, go ahead and use that Q&A box, and I will take a look and see what else we need to talk about. All right. All right, that's some good feedback. It's like timing in the market is a concern, so we'll definitely touch on that. Good deal. Let's jump into it. Like I said, we're going to start off with how to pick a town or a city. So first of all, I think Brendan mentioned that this is one of the things that a lot of home buyers who are making the move to the city struggle with is, picking a new place. So Brendan, you want to tell us a little bit about why that is?
So when if you move from the city to the suburbs, you've spent probably close to 10 years or so, 10 years in the city, and you spent all that time learning all about it. You started in one neighborhood, you moved to a next. You've been renting for part of that, and then you finally built up the savings or whatever, and you bought a place in your favorite neighborhood. And when you decide to make that jump to the suburbs, a lot of times people don't take the time or have the leisure to rent and explore new places. People don't often go and say, I'm going to go rent in Mountain Prospect so that I can decide if I like it. If I don't like it, I'm going to go rent in Arlington Heights and see if I like that more. And so it can be kind of tricky sometimes for people to identify which of all of those various suburbs they may or may not have heard of is going to be the one that they want to spend years and years in.
Yeah, so a lot of people, Chicago has a higher percentage of renters than most suburban communities. So that means most people who live here had a chance to kind of feel it out as a renter first before they made their decision. But when you're moving to the suburbs, you don't necessarily have that benefit.
And when it comes to not knowing the suburbs as well, not only do you not know the communities and what makes them up and how they differ from place to place and sort of just like what amenities you're going to get, a lot of different inventory is in different kinds or different types of suburbs as well as just a town. So knowing where you might get a split level house, you might not get that in every single suburb or every single suburb, so to speak. And knowing exactly how much that costs going into it as well. So like there's a perception that it can be a little bit cheaper to buy in the suburbs, but that's not always the case. And knowing trying to figure out what you're going to buy in terms of the house itself is a big part of that.
Very cool. All right, so let's talk about some of the factors that people tend to consider when they're trying to pick out a new community to live in. So commute, obviously a huge factor in a lot of people's decisions. So Brendan, tell us a little bit about how some of your clients have approached this decision.
Yeah, so one of the biggest starting points for a lot of people is commuting and how that factors in, because a lot of people, when they were picking their apartment or condo in the city, they're like, oh, I would like a 30-minute or less commute, right? You're like, I want to be able to walk to the train, hop on the train, hop off, and get to downtown to my job. But in the suburbs, the public transit is much more scattered. And the highways themselves are actually fairly spread out. So what you end up with is, if you, a lot of people like to try to figure out what is the maximum amount of commute they can handle, whether that's an hour and 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever it is. And with that, you can sort of build out a sort of a distance from wherever your job is to go from there. And that kind of can form of like a broader geographic area. And then if you are not a driver, if you're not going to be driving to work, you can actually focus on a lot more narrowly by just following the metro train line. There's only, between a half dozen and a dozen of those. And so you're going to be following those from stop to stop and determining from there which is the right amount of commute for you.
Great. And how do you feel about, I know you've mentioned this before, you have a bit of an opinion on tailoring your search around a particular, so yes, we'll pay you for your opinions around here.
Yeah.
What do you think?
So one thing I tell people who are moving to the suburbs, just a little piece of advice that I've gathered from other people who have already moved to the suburbs, is you don't always want to focus necessarily on the exact commute time to your exact job at that exact moment. You may want to consider what job you might have in 5 years, 10 years. A big part of owning real estate is owning it for the long haul. As Mike mentioned earlier, not as many renters in the suburbs. So if you find yourself in a new job, you don't necessarily want to be in a position where you now have to move again. Especially if it's only been a couple of years, it makes the whole process a little bit more financially stressful. So picking for commute is important. I would say you don't want to set yourself up for immediate failure, but not necessarily focusing on just that current job and thinking more about what you might be doing years down the road.
Okay, so you're making a 5, 10, maybe even 15-year decision about real estate, and are you really going to have that same job that whole time? Maybe people something to think about.
In my generation tend to move jobs more often than people in my parent generation, so it's a trend to keep in mind.
Let's talk about schools, Brendan. So obviously this is a big factor that a lot of people think about, and a couple of maybe ways of thinking about it that you could take us through.
Sure. So when deciding, the first thing you have to decide when you come across schools as a factor is, are they going to be important to you personally? Like, are you going, or is your child going to be attending that school? And thus you need to, you're going to be picking the school as part of the whole package. If that's a part of your decision, then starting with resources like great schools are great in terms of kind of narrowing down what you are looking for in a school. And I don't think there's any, like Yelp, these often you'll find user reviews on there that are the best and the worst, which can be helpful to some degree. A lot of times a very good technique is to actually find like the Facebook group of moms and dads who go to that school district and see what the community is all about, or get out there and meet some people in person. Like I've had clients who've talked to principals before. So it's not, if it is important to you, those are things that you can do to determine which is the best fit. If it's not important,
how do they track down the principal? Sorry to interrupt, but how do you track down did they just walk in?
Yes, they literally just walked in.
Really?
Non-COVID times.
Pandemic permitting. Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, so there are people, there are ways of learning more. Boots on the ground, always better than internet, but internet's a good place to start. If you decide that it's not personally relevant to you, then you have to decide is it going to affect your resale? Which is essentially saying like, will me buying in a better or supposedly worse school district affect my property value over the long haul and how that affects me? And there's two sides of that. So people are interested in buying places in quote unquote nice school districts. And that means that the property there generally costs more. So if you want to buy into that and are not necessarily interested in using the amenity, you're still paying for that amenity. It's like buying in a condominium with a pool. Even if you never use that pool, you're going to pay the assessments for it. However, if people need a pool, they're going to be looking for the building with the pool. So that kind of creates a different type of buyer, a different market for you. And again, it's going to be more expensive, generally speaking. If schools are not important to you, then you may say, hey, I'd rather get more land, bigger house, whatever, and not have to worry about the property taxes and all that stuff that come up with a quote unquote good school. But you're probably gonna have less people interested in your house when you go to sell it than otherwise, because people are interested in schools too. So it's not a for sure thing, because it's a discount you just got to pass on to the next person, but it's something to keep in mind as you decide if it's personally important or not.
Great. So if school is not necessarily important to you, you can get a discount on your home by not focusing your search necessarily on neighborhoods that have certain schools, but just be prepared to pay that discount pass that discount on to the next person, although you'll save some money in the meantime on property taxes probably.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about space and downtown area. Maybe another way of talking about this is walkability versus open space. And there's a little bit of a trade-off here that people already kind of make once you decide to leave the city. But even within one community to another outside of the city, there's trade-offs here. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so density is the big issue here, right? So how close are the houses together? When you live in the city, it's a very dense environment, right? Condos on top of condos. Once you get out into the suburbs or even the outer edges of Chicago, you're going to have single family houses, generally speaking, right? And so now they're separate, but they're very close together, all built on the same type of grid system that downtown Chicago is famous for. And so you have a situation where it's house, 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 and probably not that big of lots, still only like a 35-foot wide lot in some of these neighborhoods and subdivisions. And so when you decide what's most important to you, this factor, how much space do you need, one thing you have to keep in mind is, if I want to be close to another downtown, popular ones that are usually around like the metro stations, the towns that have those. So following the BNSF line, which is the metro I'm most familiar with that I rode when I was a kid. You have like Hinsdale and LaGrange, you have Naperville, even like Downers Grove a little bit. And those areas, the closer you get to those stations, the smaller the lots get. The less yard you're gonna get. Generally, a lot of times the housing stock itself is a little older, and you're going to be able to walk to a coffee shop, but you're not going to be necessarily getting the expansive 2-acre backyard that you might get in a suburb that is further from a metro station, and those are going to be or further from Cook County itself.
Okay, yeah, tell us a little bit about that housing stock.
Sure. So housing stock in Chicago is very dependent on age. So you'll find the more you learn about how housing was built throughout the decades in the Chicagoland area, is that in a lot of times throughout the history, the last 100 or so years, the same type of houses were built at the same time. And what that means is they were kind of built in sort of rings going out from the city. So the closest ring, you're going to have the oldest housing. So that's going to be your, farmhouse style or your pre-war buildings. Those are that you find like at Oak Park and things like that. You're going to find the next ring is going to be things built in the 50s and 60s. These are like those little ranches and bungalows that were super common to be built for like the 1950s nuclear family, so to speak. And then the next ring is 60s and 70s, mid-century houses, the cool ones with like the slopey roofs and all the angles, like, looks like Don Draper lives there. And then more modern buildings, 90s and on, you get a type of housing that's a little bit more neo-colonial is a word people throw around. Basically, when you think of suburban sprawl, these are the houses you think of. 4 bedrooms, vinyl siding, that kind of thing, very popular for that time. So when you consider which town you want, a lot of times you're also going to be considering, does that town have the type of inventory that I want to live in? So if I live in Oak Park, am I going to likely get a suburban sprawl big house? Probably not.
So it sounds like there's a lot of this stuff, a lot of different factors to consider. So how do we kind of pull all this together and start making it actionable?
Yeah, it's the same way you make a decision about buying a condo in the city or a lot of different things, buy a car, whatever. But you're going to decide what the most important factors are to you. It's super helpful to make a little list of them and check yourself on these things. Because if you're like most people, you'll go online and you'll look at all the different pretty pictures. And a lot of times they're super cool houses that you think look really cool. But if it doesn't have that basement or the big yard or whatever it is that's important to you, these factors that you've listed out, probably shouldn't be in your search. So figuring out which of those things are most important to you, then going online, looking for the ones that match those important factors. And then most importantly, going out and actually visiting these places. Like we said up top, these are all new places to most people. Unless you're moving back home, you probably have not spent much time in a suburb. So getting out there, seeing if the vibe, the feel, the amenities that are walkable and the amenities that are drivable all match up to what you have in mind.
Okay, great. And open houses, are those still a thing?
Yes, they are still a thing. And you should take advantage of them if you feel comfortable in these COVID times. And after COVID times, definitely open houses are a great way to test out the market.
Awesome. All right. And then price, how does that factor in, obviously?
So, no surprise, all the things that we just talked about factor into the price of these places. So, closer you are to a metro station and that downtown area, you're going to be often paying more money. If you're in a, quote, better school district, you're going to be paying more money. If it's walkable to that downtown area, also more money. And generally, this one's a little bit not necessarily true, but generally, the newer something is, the more expensive it is.
Okay, great. All right, so we're picking out neighborhoods, but what do we need to know about the market? I'm going to talk you through this a little bit because it's been a very interesting year for the real estate market in Chicago. We kind of got 2 different situations going on here. One is happening in Chicago's downtown and kind of nearby collar neighborhoods, and the other is happening further out. Essentially, if I could put it as short as possible, the closer you are to the loop, the more of a buyer's market it is. The further you get from the loop all the way out into the suburbs, the more of a seller's market it is. And what's happening here is a very natural progression. So if you're on this call today, it may be that you lived in Chicago for a time, and now you've decided that that time is done. It is time to get some more space. Maybe there's a certain school system that you have your eye on, and you've decided, it's either between it's either between paying for private school in the city or, getting into the public school that you want in the suburbs, and it's time to make that move. And that is something that has been happening in the Chicago area for a long time. It's kind of been the trend of the last 25, 30 years at least. So that always happens. Every year, there's a certain percentage of people who sell their place in Chicago and buy a place in a suburban community. What happened this year was pandemic happened, and people decided, you know what? Sounds like basically anyone who is planning on doing that in the next 2 or 3 years, they're doing it now. So what happened is all of that demand for suburban housing that would have been happening in 2022 or 2023 got shifted forward into this 2020 and 2021 market. We'll see what happens in 2021, but so far it's looking like it may continue a little bit longer. And moving all of that demand, crunching 36 months worth of demand into 1 year, they didn't make a whole lot of new houses, more than they were planning on in the suburbs this year. So shifting all of that demand forward with the same amount of supply caused it to become very much a seller's market. Meanwhile, when those people needed to move to the suburbs, they had to sell their old place. which means we added a ton of supply to the downtown and collar neighborhoods market. And when that happened, even though there's actually been really pretty solid demand for housing within the city, it's just there's so much supply all at once, it's actually turned it into a buyer's market. Okay, and you can see that reflected in the graph. So here is a graph of the downtown and collar neighborhoods in Chicago. And what you're looking at here is a graph of month supply. And all you need to know is that the higher the number of months supply, the more of a buyer's market it is. So you can see this graph has been going up actually since 2018 and to 2017, becoming more of a buyer's market. It has been that whole time, but come 2020, right around the middle of the year there, you can see it really kind of rocketed up. That was happening actually in late 2019 as well. So maybe not quite the trend that everyone's talking about, but it's pronounced. We're officially, the continuation of this trend has put us officially very much in a buyer's market. The opposite is true in a lot of suburban communities. And here I just pulled a few to give you guys an example. So I've got Oak Park, Naperville, Evanston, and then the entire Chicago area. It's this red line here. So you can see what was happening. Again, the higher this graph goes, the more of a buyer's market it is, and the lower it goes, the more of a seller's market it is. So look what happened in the end of 2019 through especially mid 2020. Boom, that one just goes straight down to the point where some of these neighborhoods are tipping very much towards the seller's market. Anything under 4 months of supply is considered a strong seller's market. And we've got, Naperville here is down to 3 months supply. The MLS area is under 3.5. Evanston's a little higher, but still pretty low. Oak Park. So again, closer we get to the city, still trending towards a seller's market, but a little bit more of a buyer's market. So that's borne out in the graph. So we're going to talk about what this means to you. Before we move on, I want to give you a little context here. So, lest you think that the sky is falling here in downtown Chicago, this is just a graph of the last couple of years. This is what it looks like over the last 12 years. Okay, so a lot of talk has been made, oh, is this another housing crisis? We're having that all over again. Well, here's the housing crisis back in 2010 and 2011. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse on here, but 2010 and 2011, that's what a housing crisis looks like. 14 months of inventory, that's a housing crisis. What we're at right now is just kind of a buyer's market, okay? And here's the same thing for the suburban markets. Although you are seeing some pretty low inventory here, about as low as it gets. Evanston had a really good run there in 2017 for home sellers, but for the most part, we're not seeing anything that's too crazy, but it's definitely a bit more. So another thing to consider here, actually, let's back up before we move on. So this is something you need to think about if you're planning on selling a place in Chicago and moving to and buying a place in the suburbs. If you don't need to sell a place in Chicago, just know that when you buy your place in the suburbs, it's going to be a little bit more of a seller's market. You're going to have to be a little bit more competitive, but you'll be in a good position because you don't have to sell your old home in order to buy a new home. Okay. And if you do that, we don't need to get too much into, we'll talk a little bit more like the mechanisms of this. If you don't have an old home to sell, it can make your offer more compelling for the place that you're buying. All right. And if you're looking to sell your place in Chicago and then buy a place in the suburbs and you need to sell that place before you can buy a new place, then that's going to take a little bit of planning, and understanding this market is really going to be important to you. So that's just a little prelude to the next section. I do want to talk before we go into that though about seasonality of the market. Okay. So this is for the whole Chicago metro area. The busiest time of the year in a normal year is February through May. Okay, so that's the best time to be a home seller because there's the most demand for homes in February through May. Brendan, real quick, tell us what it's like to buy a home in February through May, to be a home buyer.
Anywhere in Chicago?
Yeah, just in general.
It's requires being prepared, speed on offers. You'll generally have competition. When you're buying a place during spring, you are up against the most amount of other buyers that you will be up against. So a lot of your decisions have to happen a lot faster, and you have to be prepared to make better offers.
Got it. You ever get multiple offers?
Plenty of times.
Okay. And homes are selling faster, right? So,
yes.
You see a place hit the market on Saturday or on Wednesday, you go see it Saturday, it might already have offers on it by Sunday or Monday.
Sure, might have offers by the time you get there on Saturday too. And if it's the nicest condo on the market for something like that, it's going to be quick.
Yeah. Now this year you can see it was a little different. The peak wasn't May, it was August. Okay, and that was just because you may recall in May we were all hiding inside. All right, so that didn't tank the real estate market; it just pushed it back, which is what a lot of people kind of predicted would happen. Brendan, what's it like to buy a place right now in December?
So anytime you are able to buy a place in November and December, you have a lot of time to think about your options. You have the least amount of competition. So you go to see a place on a Wednesday, you go see it on a Saturday. You probably have time to call your brother to come to town and come check it out on the next Saturday and get their second opinion on it, and then make an offer on it if you really love it. If you don't really love it, you might be like, I'm going to see another few dozen places and see if they're the ones for me. So, and that opportunity might not be gone. Generally speaking, you're not dealing with a lot of multiple offers. Kind of in the last couple of years, December has been a little different, like mid-December. People get a little bit earlier of a start every night, it seems like it. But in general, winter months, you're going to be, late fall, early winter, you're going to have a lot less competition.
Cool. So if I could keep this as short as possible for you, first half of the year, best time to be a seller. Second half of the year, best time to be a buyer. Okay. The closer you get to probably March or April or May, the better it is to be a seller. The closer you get to October, November, December, the better it is to be a buyer. Okay. So one strategy here is to take advantage of that, right? Instead of buying in April or May when everyone else is buying, try to buy a little bit later, June, July, August. Things will be a little slower and you'll still have plenty to pick from. Instead of, and then as a seller, actually just always list in March or April. That's the best time to do it. Just please always do that if you need to sell your place. Okay. Another big picture thing to think about is interest rates here. I don't think this is big news at this point, but I do want to illustrate just what the heck is going on here. I mean, we've got interest rates. I think they hit another fresh all-time low earlier this week. Under 3% is just bananas. I mean, it's really, for a 30-year fixed rate, you can lock in a loan of hundreds of thousands of dollars at that interest rate. Man, that's not coming around. I mean, it's going to last for a little bit. That's the good news, but that doesn't come around that often. So just to illustrate the point, here's a $400,000 mortgage over 30 years. At 5% interest, you're paying over $2,100 on your monthly payment. And you can see the savings at 4%, at 3%. And again, just to remind you, we are now under 3%. So it's a pretty good deal. It's a good time to buy when it comes to interest rates. Realtors are always tell you it's a good time to buy. Good time to buy. And
it's always a good time to buy something. It's always a good time to buy something.
Maybe that's a better way to say it. Right now actually is a good time to buy. We try to tell people when it's not a good time to buy, so that when it is a good time to buy, we've got the credibility, which right now it's a good time to buy. And here's where that fits in historically speaking. So, in case like interest rates have been, this is what they've been doing over the past year. What they've been doing over the past 50. Okay, you can see here in the late 70s, early 80s, what interest rates were like. That's why everyone grew up hearing that 20% down was the only way to buy a home. Because when interest rates are 15%, you want to borrow as little money as possible. Okay, and last but not least, I got another question about this over the weekend, so I definitely want to address this here. Another question was, is this going to be another housing bubble, another housing bust? And here's the deal. I do think like I said, all that demand for suburban housing has shifted forward. And as a result, in maybe a year or two or three, it might be a little soft in the suburbs. Why? Because all the people who were going to buy a place in the suburbs in 2022, 2023 already did it. So if you do need to sell in the suburbs in 2022 or 2023, you might have a harder time. I think the opposite is going to be true in downtown Chicago. I think a lot of people dumped their condos this year to make that move. And so if you go to buy a place in downtown Chicago 2-3 years from now, you might have a little bit of a shortage. We'll see. That's just a prediction of mine. Now, I do think a lot of this demand is based on this last graph that I just showed you of interest rates. I think that's pushing a lot of people kind of, again, pushing that forward a little bit. But it's very, very fundamentally different from 2004 through 2008 in terms of what's happening. The big difference is back then, the increase in the market was based on pure speculation, not on the fundamentals of what people could afford and what homes were worth. Okay, so people were buying homes just because they thought they would be worth more. You hear about people who don't even have a steady income buying 2, 3, 4 homes, right? Because the money was basically, they were just handing out mortgages to everybody. They didn't check your credit. They didn't make sure that you made enough money to afford the mortgage. They had loans back then that the mortgage balance went up over time. So first they had interest only loans. So you're only paying the interest. You're not ever reducing the principal. Okay. They had loan, and then they invented loans where you didn't even cover all of the interest. Say your interest was $1,600 a month, you only had to pay $1,200 a month, and $400 kept getting tacked onto your principal balance every single month. And people were okay with this because they thought their homes were going to appreciate by 5% every 6 months, and that they'd just refinance again into another loan, or that they'd flip this place and make a ton of money. So that's what was happening back then, and that's not happening right now. There's nothing like that. It's actually kind of a pain to get a loan, especially if you're self-employed, speaking from experience. So if you've got the income, and if you've got you don't need a huge down payment. Basically, if you got the income and the credit score, it's a pretty good time to buy a place. And there's pretty good options out there, but it's nothing like last time. By the way, this situation changes all the time, and we're constantly keeping an eye on it. In fact, every month we send out our market update report on the Chicago and Chicago area market. You can sign up for that here and see all the awkward faces I make when you pause the video just right. And I think Jessica's gonna put that link in the chat right now. So definitely recommend signing up for that, and we will keep posted as the situation changes. So we talked about timing the market. The other thing to think about is timing your buy and timing your sell, right? So people always want to know, what do I do? Do I put my place on the market and then wait till someone comes along and buys it and then go find another place real quick? Or do I find another place and then try to sell my place really quickly once I put an offer in? There's kind of 3 ways to go about it. 2 main ways and then kind of a few other fancy ways. All right, and I like to think about this as the money maximizing way, the choice maximizing way, and the have your cake and eat it too, but take a little bit of a risk way, okay? So 3 options here. Let's take them one at a time. First, let's maximize our money. Let's just say that you are super focused on making the best financial decision possible with your real estate. You're gonna sell your place first and then go buy a new place. So in other words, you're gonna get your home looking great. You're gonna list it and put it on the market. And you're gonna wait until you get the offer that you want on it, okay? Hopefully that'll be fast. Hopefully you've followed all of our staging advice. The place is looking spiffy. And you've listed at the perfect time of the year, and you're following all of our advice, and you get an offer really quickly. But either way, you're going to sell when you get the offer that you want, the highest possible offer for your place. Okay. Then you're going to go buy your new place. When you buy your new place, you are going to have to make an offer that's contingent on the sale. You may have to make an offer that's contingent on the sale of your existing place. So in other words, if you need the funds from the proceeds of your sale in order to put a down payment on your new place, then you're going to need to make sure that when you make an offer on your new place, you need to make sure that the old offer, nothing goes wrong with that contract, right? And if something does fall through on the sale of your old home, you don't want to be stuck having to buy the new home and not have a down payment for it. You could be in hot water there. So you're going to write a contract to the sellers of your new home that says, hey, if anything goes wrong with our old sale, we need to be able to cancel the contract and get our earnest money back and not risk losing it or you suing us for not performing on this contract. Okay, so that clause is going to be in there and that protects you. But the sellers of that property are going to say, well, that gives us a little bit less confidence moving forward with your offer because we could take our home off the market for 6 weeks and then suddenly something goes wrong with your old sale and now we can't sell our place to you anymore. And that's a problem because maybe we got to go buy a new place, right? So a home sale contingency on an offer isn't unheard of, but it's not great. So if you have to make one of those offers, it's really helpful to be able to say, hey, we already put our place on the market, it's under contract, and we already had the inspection, we closed out attorney review. This is gonna happen. So don't worry about it. You can take your home off the market and we'll be able to buy it. This is just out there as like a worst case scenario, but don't worry about it too much, okay? And the reason that's a money maximizing strategy is because when you're negotiating with that seller, they're more interested in selling their property to you. You'll always, well, I shouldn't say always, but often be able to get the seller to sell you their home at some price with a home sale contingency, but they might be really turned off by that and say, well, you can pay us our full asking price and then we'll go under contract with you, but we're not going to negotiate off the list price for a home sale contingent offer. So in other words, having that protection, having that home sale protection costs you a little bit money. But if you're already under contract on your old home, then it doesn't cost you as much because you can say, listen, it's fine. Don't worry about it. We're going to be able to sell it. I'm working with a fantastic real estate agency. We got this thing all tied up and it's going to close on time. No problems. Okay. But here's the downside with that strategy. You're on the clock to find a new home, right? Because you already sold your old place. The new buyers want to move in and they've got a closing date. Maybe their lease is ending. So you've got to go out and really quickly find a new home you want to spend the next 5-10 years of your life in and get it under contract and close in time to be out so that you can sell your old place, right? So this puts you in the best position to, again, you wait for the right offer on your old place, which means you sell it for more. You don't have to fire sell it. And you get to make a stronger offer on your new place because you're already under contract and either your home sale contingency looks really appealing because you're already under contract, or maybe you feel so good about it that you don't even need a home sale contingent offer because you know you're going to sell your old place. It's already under contract, it's already passed inspection, maybe it's already even appraised. But the longer you wait to get all of that stuff taken care of, the less time you have to find your new place. So you maximize your money, but you minimize your choices of your new place. So let's say you're real picky and you want to make sure you find the right place. Well, you might want to go with option 2, which is choice maximization, okay? So you don't put your home on the market yet. You definitely get it ready. Please get it all ready. Get it all nice and staged. We're going to get photos taken. It's going to be ready to go. But you don't want to put it on the market yet because you don't want to accidentally sell it and not be able to find the right place. So you get it ready to go and then you take your time. You take your time until you find that perfect place that you know you're going to spend the next 10, 15 years in. And then you make an offer on that home and you say, and here's where that home sale contingency kind of comes to bite you. You say, hey, we're going to make an offer. We'll pay you this price, but we need to be able to cancel the contract if we're unable to sell our old home. This is also nice if you don't need the funds from your old sale to buy the new place, then you can kind of let your old place sit vacant a little bit, but that will cost you a little bit. That's another way of going about this. But here's here's the catch. You're going to spend more money doing this. Okay. Why? Because when you make your offer on the new home, you're going to have that home sale contingency hanging over you. And so I was going to say, so you're telling me that you're going to give me, you know, $475,000 for my home, but I've got to wait 6 weeks to see if you can manage to sell your old place in Chicago, which I heard is more of a buyer's market. Oops. Is more of a buyer's market. I'm worried you're not going to be able to sell your old place. And then all of a sudden I lost 6 weeks in market time. I got to cancel this deal and start over. Not too interested in that. So the only way you're going to get them interested in that is by paying them a little bit more money. And that's reality, folks. Like, you know, you might get a decent discount off of the list price, but the truth is you would have gotten an even better one if you didn't have that home sale contingency. Now you're under contract on your new place and you've got a closing date and you've also got a deadline. You've got a deadline that says, if I can't get my old home under contract by this deadline, then I have to waive this contingency and risk not being able to sell it, or I have to cancel this contract and I don't get the home. So that means you got to put your old house on the market and hope that you sell it fast. Now, if you followed all of our advice, hopefully selling it quickly is also the same as selling it profitably. Those are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but if the market's a little softer in the city, which it is, and it's taken a little bit longer and you're coming up on that deadline and someone comes in with a low ball offer, you're going to have to negotiate with them a little bit. And you might have to give up more money on your own old home than you wanted to. So check this out. You got to take your time finding your new place. You picked out the perfect place, but you ended up spending a little more money on it because of the home sale contingency, and you made a little bit less money selling your old place because you had to sell it quickly. Okay, so that's why this is the choice maximizing option, but it's the one that doesn't result in as much money. All right, so you can try and get a little creative, right, by taking on some more risk. So you can put an offer in on the new place and just not do the home sale contingency, and fingers crossed, you sell your old place in time. The risk there is, if you don't sell your old place in time, you could be carrying 2 mortgages. And if you don't sell your old place in time and you don't have any, if you don't sell your old place in time and you can't make the down payment without doing that, you risk defaulting on the contract, which could be really expensive. I got a good question here. I'm going to answer this. It says, if offering more money because of the home sale contingency, do you still make the contract subject to appraisal? Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So any contract that you're offering is going to be contingent or subject to a mortgage contingency. And it basically says that if I don't get this, if for whatever reason I'm not able to get a mortgage on this property, then I'm able to back out of the contract and get my earnest money back. You would always want that contingency in your contract. And having a mortgage contingency is kind of that sort of supersedes or includes having an appraisal contingency. So yeah, I get where you're going with this. You're saying, hey, I'm offering a little bit more for this place than maybe I would have gotten it for because I've got this home sale contingency. What if the appraiser comes out and says it's not worth that much? That's a risk. Brendan, what happens if an appraisal comes in low? It's your favorite, isn't it?
Only fun things happen after that. So
pour a drink.
Once an appraisal comes in low, you are stuck with a couple options. One is to bring more of your own money, cash, to the closing to make up the difference. So the bank will still lend you money based upon the value they deem the place is worth. So if the place is worth $400,000 in the bank size and you've paid $420,000, then you can still get the same loan that you filled out earlier, but you're bringing a $20,000 more down payment. The other option is to call it off. That's the other side of that, is say, hey, I don't have $20,000 more dollars, so I'm not going to put that into this house, and the deal's off, which is a shame because you probably, in this case, spent a long time finding that house. And then the other side of that is you can negotiate with the seller to change the condition, the terms of the contract. So you can say, hey, our mortgage contingency is going to stay the same, but the price has got to change now. And in that case, you're hoping the seller will see you as their best buyer at that point. Hopefully some time has passed and they've been off the market for a bit and they really do see you as the bird in hand. But they might say, hey, while we've been under contract on this home sale contingency, I'm still doing showings and I know I have other people who will make an offer. So that is always with any sort of home sale contingency that might tie into a mortgage contingency in this. Your offer is not only less competitive in the seller's eyes, it's less competitive compared to other offers.
You could try to fight a low appraisal too, because some of these appraisers, like,
they're often bad.
Appraisals.
They're often very bad, and it's
often quite bad.
You're often at that time, if you're going to fight it, a lot of times the end point of that is getting a whole new loan, which again, is going to push you past a lot of the deadline dates.
It usually doesn't work, but you can try. You might get them to come up $5,000. Here's the deal: if you end up paying, you're probably going to end up paying, I don't know, 1.5% more for the place because of a home sale contingency, give or take total ballpark numbers. Usually an appraiser will just kind of say, if it's within $5,000, they'll probably just give you, if they think the place is worth $396, you paid $400, they'll probably give you $400. They'll probably just put the value at $400. That's usually what happens. Interest or a curious percentage of mortgage or of appraisals come in at exactly the contract price. Right. And it's because it's what a willing party sold it for and an arm's length buyer bought it for. And that's kind of what the value of the home is what someone's willing to pay for it. So usually if it's close enough, the appraiser will give it to you, but every once in a while you get a stickler or someone who doesn't know what they're doing. So good question. You can try using a bridge loan. These can be a little risky too, because they're higher interest rates, but there's been some more products introduced to the market recently over the past couple of years that make this a little bit interesting. Talk to your local realtor or a lender. We're kind of joking about the roommates thing, but we do know people who do this. A lot of folks will sell their old place, and if they're from the suburbs, or maybe if they're not, everyone's working remote these days, they actually move in with friends or typically their parents. And maybe they get free childcare out of the deal for a little bit, and then they take their time finding a new place. We've also had people rent a place. So we had some clients who sold their place in Lakeview, and then they rented out in the near west suburbs for 8 months, and not even. And then they fell in love with the community, and they eventually bought a place. So that's an option too. If you're renting right now, get started. Like I said, now is the best time to make offers on places. It's still a seller's market in the suburbs, but it's slowing down around the holidays. So now is not a bad time to get out there. Again, starting in February, March, it's going to pick up again. I think it's going to be pretty busy and quite the seller's market. So you don't have to deal with trying to sell your place. So I'd say strike while the iron's hot. If you got to sell your place, then you might want to take your time a little bit more, because again, it's more of a, it's going to take you a little bit longer to sell your place. Oh, and if you're renting right now, you might want to attend one of our How to Buy a Home or Rent versus Buy seminars, just to make sure that buying's right for you and get kind of the overview of how it's different from renting. Speaking of difference, we do need to talk about how it's different to buy a home in the suburbs versus the city. So Brendan's going to take us through that really quickly. Brendan, what are some of the differences between, still your thunder, between working, owning a single family home versus owning and buying a condo?
My spotlight came back on. So the big difference is that when you buy a condo, there's a whole nother level to it because you're buying into an association. And your lender, you all have to approve of that association to make that deal happen. When you buy in the suburbs, if you're not buying a condo or townhouse, you're buying, even if you're buying into a subdivision with like a master association, someone who like tends the garden or cleans the local pool, your lender isn't involved in that. There's no meeting minutes to approve or something like that. So it's a simpler process on that front. And oftentimes when you're buying single family houses, the rates are lower.
Very cool. All right. What about the locals? What are some things we got to think about there?
So yeah, one of the first things you should look up when deciding, hey, I think I'm really definitely going to buy a place in Forest Park. Forest Park is the town for me. One thing you may want to look into is, does Forest Park, do they regulate their real estate transactions? As in, do they send out a city or village inspector who's going to go out there and make sure that things are up to their code? It's not necessarily like a building code, but it's whatever their code is. And if so, is that going to be an impediment or an issue when it comes to buying the place that you want to buy? If you're thinking of buying like a fixer upper, for instance, that's something you might want to look into.
Cool. What about taxes?
When it comes to taxes, so counties often big dividing lines in terms of the rates you're going to be getting. Taxes in Illinois, as I think most people have probably heard one way or another, are generally higher than other states. So moving out of the city does not mean lower taxes. You're going to have bigger land and a bigger house, probably than your smaller condo. So your overall absolute tax bill is probably going to go up. How much it goes up kind of depends on the town.
What about transfer taxes?
Oh, transfer taxes. Sorry, could have read the first word in there. Transfer taxes are, that's the tax that the municipality or the county places on the transaction itself. So what that means, in Chicago, it's 7.5 cents on every $100, and paid by the buyer and the seller at closing. Different towns have different amounts. So your closing costs will be different from town to town.
Got it. All right. We just talked about property taxes, and you mentioned this. They're going to be higher because you own more property. We also got a question about interest rates. So just comparing single-family homes in the city versus single-family homes in the suburbs, are the interest rates on the mortgage any different there? Not to my knowledge.
I don't think so. I think if you buy a single-family house, that loan is a single-family house loan, to my knowledge.
Yeah. I'm almost certain, but I'm not a lender, so I do not want to speak out of turn, but a humble realtor here. 90% sure that there's no, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are not going to change interest rates based on the locality. It's possible that some jumbo mortgage products might have that overlay on it, but not for a conventional product. Inspection. Brendan, let's talk about this. This is a good thing to make people aware of. Yeah.
This is once you've already decided on the house and all that, and this is the one you want, right? So you're gonna have the inspection. What I hear back from a lot of our clients who have bought a place in the city and then bought a place in the suburbs is that they notice that suddenly they have so many more problems with the house than they did with their condo. And it's going to be a longer of a list when they get the inspection report back generally, because you're dealing with, again, you're not dealing with just the four walls and all the appliances inside of it. You're dealing with the roof, you're dealing with the foundation, the land itself, the grading of the soil outside, the front stoop, is that level enough? So all these different things, it tends to be a much bigger project to take on to be a homeowner of a single family house. And so you have to factor into all that extra maintenance just to make sure, that's something you want to get into, but also don't necessarily be so freaked out when that list comes your way. That is kind of just what it is.
Yeah, so you don't have to pay those homeowners association dues every month. Those, a couple $100 in assessment that you are slinging every couple of months, but you're gonna have to pay for some bigger projects all by yourself. So.
Yeah, when the hail comes and damages your roofs and siding, it's all on you to get that fixed.
Yeah, exactly. Or your insurance, depending on your homeowner's insurance. But that's a topic for another conversation. All right, folks. Well, we covered a lot of ground today. It's quite possible that you've come up with some questions about your particular situation, or you might just want to bounce your plans off of a realtor who's done this a few times before. So if that is you, check out the link that's landing in the chat box right now. Click that link, and that's going to take you directly to Brendan's calendar. Just grab 15 minutes with him. We call it a 15-minute real estate Q&A. Okay, so tell us what your questions are. Tell us what you're thinking. We'll give you a little bit of feedback. Even if you're not planning on buying for 6 to 12 months, it's good to have a contact in the real estate industry, somebody you can trust with questions like this. And again, it's part of our mission to educate people about real estate and to kind of lead with that education. when the time comes, we hope you'll reach out to us. But in the meantime, we're more than happy just to be a sounding board. Questions? Any others? Drop them in the Q&A. You guys have been pretty good about dropping them in as we go. Like I said, use that link and you can bounce those questions off of Brendan or Jonathan or one of our other agents. Hey, we got another one coming up, and this is going to be a good one. Coming up in 2 weeks, we're going to take a look at the 2021 Chicago real estate market. So we're starting to get a pretty good peek at what that's going to be like. Usually November and December will give you an idea of what the upcoming year is going to be like. Looking like probably a busy one. So tune in and we'll break it all down for you so you can see what that means for you, especially if you've got a purchase in one community and a sale in the other. You're really going to want to be up on all of this stuff. So we'll look forward to seeing you back there at the next one. And in the meantime, drop us a line if you need us. Thanks, everybody.